who's going to come into government? It's going to be the Labour Party. So do we want this issue on the backbenches in opposition where Keir Starmer and the rest of the Labour Party don't have to listen to you because we've got a big majority and that's, he can carry on with ploughing through his policies? Or do we want to be in the party? Do we want to take out the strong voices? Because one thing that nobody can say to me is that you haven't been a strong voice for Palestine. So would we take out that strong voice and replace it for somebody on the other side of the house? No, that's not right.
Welcome to the Big Picture podcast. My name is Mohammed Hassan, and today we are in Bradford to sit down with Labour Party MP and candidate for Bradford West, Naz Shah. Shah has held the seat since 2015, after beginning her career as a carer with the NHS and a community advocate, campaigning, among other things, for the release of her own mother from prison. In November, she broke ranks with the Labour Party leadership to support a call for a ceasefire in Gaza and resigned from her position in the shadow cabinet. She wasn't alone. 55 other Labour MPs did the same, in one of the biggest challenges to the leadership of Keir Starmer, who's been heavily criticised over remarks he made supporting Israeli military action.
But when Israel acts with impunity and attacks hospitals, UN schools and refugee camps, and the case for Palestinians is vetoed by the US and the UK at the International Criminal Court, then the world asks, is our justice really unbiased?
But despite her public positions and a long track record of speaking about Palestine and Islamophobia, Naz Shah hasn't evaded criticism from her own community over her association with the party itself, as calls grow among Muslim voters to boycott Labour altogether in the general elections. So how does she feel about being caught in the middle between her community and her party? Naz Shah, it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome to the Big Picture.
Thank you very much, and thank you for travelling all the way to Bradford.
It's our pleasure.
Have you been to Bradford before?
This is our first time in Bradford.
This is your first time in
Yes.
Bradford? Oh, you're going to have to come back next time, another time as well. Cool.
So we're in the last couple of days of campaigning before the general election. It is going to be, by all accounts, a historic election. Labour is going to form a government by all expectations, by all measures.
Yep.
First time in 14 years.
Inshallah.
That is going to be a huge, a huge moment for you as well, but also for the party. What are you sort of looking forward to? What do you think the next couple of months is going to look like for you yourself, but for the party?
Well, change for me, which is ultimately either people will wait. It's a week today that we go to the polls, right? So we've literally got not that many sleeps in between, as my kids would put it. And for me, change is very much about, the NHS waiting list at the moment, 40,000 new hospital appointments, GP appointments to clear that backlog. There used to be an 18-week waiting list for people to get to see a specialist. That in Bradford, we've over 3,800 people on waiting lists at the hospital, which is in my constituency. That's one of the big issues for us. So to be able to have them 40,000 just to clear that backlog, and it reminds me of 1997 because I'm a former NHS commissioner, and in 1997 we cleared the backlog for hip replacements, for example. And that's the same kind of thing. We've inherited the NHS literally not fully invested in, and being stripped really over the last 14 years. So that's one of the big issues that I'm hoping that's going to have an immediate impact where we can get that stuff done. Nothing happens overnight because we're going to be finding what we've inherited, fiscally, what's in the coffer, so to speak. We've got children schools who are knocking back, bringing their lunch hours forward earlier because children haven't had a meal in the morning or haven't had breakfast. So for me, the Labour's promise of giving every child in primary school free breakfast, is massive because that goes a long way. The idea that you will have 3,000 more nurseries in primary schools, it frees up parents to get back into the into job, because at the moment childcare is very, very expensive for parents. These are the bread and butter issues. Bradford University is the leading university in the country on artificial intelligence, and yet we do not have the jobs and the infrastructure. One of the biggest things for Bradford and the whole city, not just Bradford West, is we're the only place in the country where we have a cul-de-sac for our trains. So they're coming from both ways, go out from both ways, adding time. So we could get to Wakefield quicker in Edwardian times than we can today. So that train station, I've played an instrumental role in bringing a train station, train station to Bradford. So that could unlock 10 billion worth of economic activity and development. You know, there's a knock-on effect. So just like the domino effect of when you've got austerity impacts on everything from every person in a family, right down to your dining table on an evening or your breakfast table in the morning, this is the same in the other way. Once you have that business development, once you have job prospects, once you develop the economic stability in the city, then your city thrives. And because your city thrives, the people in it thrive. But when we don't have that, when we have 50% cuts in our budgets, when we have all of these things from central government and the council can't provide those kind of services and the buses do cost extra money, every little thing, it is like going back to that domino effect, affects the level of attainment for our children. It affects, well, if you don't get a meal in the morning, you're already not going to achieve as much because of retention, you know, for your brain development, as a child. And then you don't have the same exposure to opportunities. You know, you don't know poverty when I was raised in poverty, I didn't understand it until I'd come out of poverty, right? So when you're in that, you don't know any difference. But once you've explored and you see the world of reading, literature, arts, culture, visiting places, experiencing that opens up a whole new experience for children. And that's what our children need, you know, and that's not been the case for the last 14 years. So I can go on and on, you know, about because I'm from Bradford, right?
Yeah.
So I'm from here.
You born here, you grew up here?
Yep, born here, grew up here, very, very Bradford made, you know, wear the badge with pride. And I know it because I've been there. You know, I've lived in poverty. I grew up in poverty, in abject poverty, as I say, you know, with a single parent family. There's, you know, my backstory is well catalogued. I campaigned. You know, I had a forced marriage at 15. I've experienced being on benefits. I've experienced being homeless. I've experienced being a single parent. You know, these are issues which are really, really close to me, and they're personal. Because I have been very, very blessed. Alhamdulillah, I'm one of the most blessed people I know to be able to get to where I got to because of luck, because Allah has blessed me with opportunities and people, etc. And I want that for every kid, because if I can do it, then every kid can do it.
And that is quite an incredible story that you have, and that you have been quite open about and talked about your journey to get to where you are today and representing the people from the city that you grew up in.
Absolutely.
How has that shaped your ability to be a politician, to be somebody that represents people here in Bradford, people that, you know, children that were on poverty, and a third of Bradford is in poverty, children in Bradford are in poverty. What do you carry with you when you go into Parliament to speak on behalf of people here?
Well, you carry that lived experience. You know, the last time there was some research done, only 6% of parliamentarians were actually from working class backgrounds. You know, so being real and not being authentic, I don't mind somebody not having to have my experiences to understand me, but there's a difference between having a lived experience, and that lived experience you can relate to people, you understand what it's like because you've been there. And there are people who are much worse off even than when I was growing up. And you can relate to it, you have an empathy. So I have two passions in life. One is community development and one is leadership. And both of them, I didn't intend to go into politics when I ended up in politics. You know, I was challenged. I was like, you know, why don't you become a politician? Because you're opinionated and you're very passionate. And I was like, no, don't be daft, it's the dirtiest place in a man's world. And then it says, well, if you don't get in it, how are you going to clean it up? And that was a fair challenge. And then I thought, yeah, you've got to be, you know, in the words of great leaders, you've got to be the change that you want to see. So I stepped in and I've never looked back, and I love what I do. Being able to make a difference, being able to advocate. In the last 9 years, as an opposition member of Parliament, I've brought in £20 million for the Levelling Up Fund, which the council had to return because we didn't have the funding, which with the council cuts. So, you know, that was for my constituency, that was a £40 million loss in total. I've helped it bring in 32 million for Bradford College, because that is something I'm passionate about. Because somebody who's not been to college, you know, who hasn't had education, I left school at 12. I mean, I went back and did 2 equivalent GCSEs as a mature student. and I've had lots of, the University of Life, if you like. I've had an alternative education from people, from, experiential learning. But the truth is, what would I rather like? I would rather them young people go through a structured educational process so that they can achieve their dreams and be the best that they can be. For me, equality is a big issue because I've fought on the issue of equality since I've known life, if you like, since I've, the inequality when it comes to women, I always say that I thought that that started for me in my mother's womb because of a patriarchal mindset of if I was a boy, I'd have been born and different and treated differently, but I was a girl and I was treated differently. So if you live in that structured environment all your life, all you do is challenge and challenge and challenge because you want a better society. You want a more equal society. No, and equality for me is not about achieving the same outcomes, because I will never be a sprinter. I will never be an Olympic sports person because it's not my bag.
Never too late.
But by the same token, I want to be the best that I can be in politics. And what do I mean by equality? Equality is about having an opportunity, a fair, level playing field. And the fact is that, and there's a brilliant video on YouTube about equality, where they line young people up and they say, if you have, both parents step forward, if you don't have to worry about your bills, if you don't have to worry about your food, and by the time you finish with it, you've only got a few people right at the front. They have an advantage over the rest of those young people because they've had obstacles. So when I say I want equality, I want the equality of opportunity for people to reach their potential, what they want to be, and that's up to them. But I want them to have the choices. I want them to have the opportunity to be able to reach those and to be able to thrive and being the best that they can be. I mean, for me, it's oh God, this is it's so personal for people, because Bradford does not have a poverty of aspiration. There is no shortage of brains, of dreams, of just like anywhere else in the world. There is no shortage of it. What we have a shortage of, and what we have the poverty of, is infrastructure and support to allow that dream to be developed, to allow that inspiration to be realized. That's what we have the poverty of. So for me, this is hugely personal. Being here, when I was born, it was literally less than a mile up the road on Grantham. I've spent my teenage years in Manningham. I've been to different schools in the constituency. So when I meet people, I know people, I connect with people, I understand what it's like. And coming from the background that I do, and you've got the connections from your families or your elders who've come from Pakistan as economic migrants, largely in Bradford. There's lots of the Pakistani diaspora community in particular. So you have links from that side as well. So it's a really, really interesting place. It's a fascinating place to be.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the other things as well is that it's the second biggest Muslim constituency in the UK.
Yeah. So we debate that, right? So me and Liam Burns debate that between Birmingham and Bradford.
It's very close.
It's like 59, it's a point something percentage, right?
I'm sure you overlap each other it's just sometimes during the year. And you are one of the most prominent and vocal Muslim voices in Parliament.
Alhamdulillah.
And going into this election, of course, you're speaking to a very big Muslim constituency here in Bradford West. What are people telling you? What is on their minds going into this election specifically?
So there's the usual stuff what we've talked about, which is your cost of living crisis, your poverty, your jobs, your job security, economic stability, your bills, your mortgages, your not being able to get a doctor's appointment. That's the most common one.
Yep.
I can't get a doctor's appointment in the morning. I had that last night. I had that in two places last night. Not being able to have those opportunities. But there is also the added issue for us. There's also an added pain with what's going on in Palestine. And that is something that is really, really close to people's hearts, including mine. So that's something that comes up. And it's because of that we have two independents that have, that are standing on that issue. Yeah. But that issue is something that comes up absolutely all the time.
And these independents are standing against you as the representative of the Labour Party. There's a big push to try and vote against Labour specifically because there's a lot of anger towards the stances that the party leadership has had over Gaza.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's anger towards Labour. The LBC interview always comes back, whether, despite that Keir has clarified his comments later on, that the truth is that the position has moved. in November, if we go back to November, and because I've been working on Palestine long before my politics, and I've been consistent in my voice on the Palestinian issue, there is no arguing that. You know, the conversations I've led, the speeches I've made are on record for everybody to see. And by the time it was November, after October, when October happened that week, so I'm part of the executive of Labour Friends of Palestine, and Labour Friends of Palestine were having a conference event, which was on the Tuesday at the Labour Party conference after the 7th of October. And I remember that Saturday morning, I can never forget that Saturday morning. And we, you know, it was shock, it was horror, it was all of those things that go through your head. But at the same time, I was working with Hossam for the Tuesday event, for the Monday event, where the ambassadors have, all the Arab ambassadors, we were all together, including the Egyptian ambassador, the Saudi ambassador, the Jordanians, the Lebanese, all the ambassadors, and Hossam Zomlot, the Palestinian ambassador, and we were talking about, you know, okay, where do we go? You know, what do we, because it was very, very early days, you know, and how do we work? What do we do? What are going to be the challenges? What was, you know, the response from Israel? All of these things. So I've been involved in that through Labour Friends of Palestine. I've been involved in that because I've worked with, even before I, you know, became an executive member of Labour Friends of Palestine, because I've been working with that on for years on the issues. Now, the anger that people feel, we are all angry. What so some of the things that I worry about, nobody has a monopoly on the pain for the Palestinians. You know, nobody does. I've had Palestinians here supporting me yesterday. I'm a mother of 3 children. The reason when I first started getting engaged with talking about Palestine was because, just like everybody else, I saw a video, and I'll never forget that man's eyes. I can still see it vividly in front of, I know where I was sat at the time I saw that video, was holding up his child, which was, you know, his bottom half of his body wasn't there, and he held it up to the world, you know, and it was like, look, and you could look into those eyes, and it's what's happened there. And when you learn about it, when you realize, and in over the last 9 years, the political background to the whole history, you know, from the Balfour Declaration to what happened, you know, the 67 issue, there's the Oslo Accords, the 67 borders, all of that, when you listen to it, nothing has ever been resolved for the Palestinians. This is a failure. It's one of the biggest failures of the whole world, of the whole globe, in terms of what's happening to the Palestinian people. Britain, and I've said this in Parliament time and time again, has an added responsibility because of the Balfour Declaration. And 5 years ago, when we had at the time, we had a Westminster Hall debate to celebrate the Balfour Declaration. And I said, I can't celebrate something which hasn't been delivered for the Palestinians. You haven't kept your part, and Britain has a responsibility to that. So I get that pain. I also understand that I have a responsibility, not just to my pain, I also have a responsibility to the people of Palestine. And to the people of Palestine, I am not allowed to, as painful as it is, sit here and focus on my pain. That would be wrong of me. What I need to focus on is what has God blessed me with, what position He has blessed me with, and what is my responsibility from a leadership position to deliver on that. Because this ain't about you, Naz. You can cry all you want on a night, you can cry all you want, but that's not the job that you've been gifted with. You have been honoured with a position, with a voice and a platform. What are you going to do with it? And in doing so, that's my test. And my test is about, somebody said, you know, there are positions that you have to take. And in your career, there's choices you have to make. And if it costs your career, that's a secondary thing. The primary thing is, are you delivering on your promise and what you can, you know, ethically and morally, what is the right thing, what is the wrong thing? You have to make them decisions because God has gifted you with that. And on the 15th of November, I made that choice. For me, on a personal level, but also, ultimately, we're elected by our constituents. My inbox was thousands and thousands of emails to support the ceasefire. So I represent my constituents, I represent me, and I voted for that ceasefire. My party was not in the right place. If it was in the right place, we'd have all voted for the ceasefire as far as I'm concerned. You know, it's got there. It's got there. It's taken months to get there, but it's got there. It has got to the position where it supports the ICC. It's got to the position where it supports the ICJ. It's got to the position where it supports the UN. It has got to the position of an immediate ceasefire. But that ceasefire still has not happened. You know, so for me, what is it that I need to be working on for the issue of a diplomatic solution for Palestine? And that will start with state recognition. It will be one piece of a jigsaw. It won't be the rest of it because there's way too much to be done. There is 100 years, over 100 years of what's been going on, what's been happening since the Nakba. We've had 78 years since the Nakba. What we need to do is, that is the first, I would say the beginning of things, would to have that state recognition. Over 144 countries already recognise Palestine. That still hasn't shifted the dial, right? But that is what I'm going to campaign on. So that is one of my pledges here, as part of my pledges to Bradfordians, because my constituents in Bradford West, that is one of my pledges. But I equally say this: yes, we are angry. That doesn't, you know, for me, the conversation around Palestine is way too important to be taken to the fringes. Way too important. The independents, one of them, and this might make you chuckle, the idea that one of the independents was campaigning in May. So the election got called at the end of May, right? Less than 4 weeks earlier, he had been campaigning for the Labour Party because his father was standing to be a Labour councillor. And he lost his seat after 28 years to an 18-year-old. And then 4 weeks later, he decided, right, and 8 months, I've driven past his solicitor's firm for 8 months because it's on my way home. And all of a sudden, he discovered the Palestinian flag to go up in his window. You know, where was it? Where was it? Not even just 8 months ago. This didn't start on October the 7th. You know, and it's like, really? You really think that, so it's like, honestly, are you going to now, so there's political opportunism. That is that. And I think that people are not stupid. They see through that. And then we have a 21-year-old, and a 21-year-old who's just become a councillor 4 weeks prior, promising that he's going to deliver for local issues in that ward, not a constituency of 6 wards, of 79,000 voters and more young people, and deliver that. But he was campaigning in that ward. And now from that, I want to be a member of Parliament on the issue of Gaza. I'm not denying, and I'm not taking away the passion for Gaza. That is not the thing for me. You can have the pain for the Palestinians, and it's not either or. It is absolutely okay for people to be also concerned about local services here after 14 years of the austerity, of the chaos that we've had under the Tory government. These are not, they're not mutually exclusive. They can be held at the same time. You can feel the pain for the people of Palestine. You can feel the pain for a lot of Kashmiris here for the issue of Kashmir. You can feel those pains, and you can still want your doctor, your elderly grandparent, to be able to get a doctor's appointment, or to be able to go to hospital, or to be able to, to have the best for your children. And that, for me, is some of that is about exploiting people's pain. That I don't like. I really, really don't like. And the other thing for me is, ultimately, what is it that I have said that or you're going to say that I haven't said? So you're asking for a ceasefire. Yep, support that. Arms embargo, support that. ICC, support that. The UNRWA, support that. ICJ, support that. UN, support that. So what else are you going to say apart from being on the backbenches, sat with the Tories? Because like you said earlier, who's going to come into government? It's going to be the Labour Party. So do we want this issue on the backbenches in opposition, where Keir Starmer and the rest of the Labour Party don't have to listen to you because we've got a big majority, and that's, he can carry on with ploughing through his policies? Or do we want to be in the party? Do we want to take out the strong voices? Because one thing that nobody can say to me is that you haven't been a strong voice for Palestine. So would we take out that strong voice and replace it for somebody on the other side of the house? No. That's not right.
So this seems to be an argument less about individual candidates such as yourself, and more about the Labour Party itself and its relationship to the British Muslim community. And there is, of course, a sizable voter base in this country, definitely in Bradford West.
Absolutely.
And the voices that are calling for support of independent candidates are saying that Gaza is an example of how Muslim voters are taken for granted by mainstream parties in this country, but specifically by the Labour Party that has enjoyed for decades the almost unanimous votes of British Muslims. Do you think that the Labour Party values its Muslim voters?
I think the Labour Party has got a hell of a lot of work to do to rebuild that trust, because we have lost a lot of trust. The Muslim community, I would be, I'm trying to think of nice phrases to use. Right? I wouldn't be being honest if I was saying that the Muslim vote, the people of Muslim heritage, have that trust like it did maybe 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago. It doesn't. People feel betrayed, and people are angry, people are upset. People are upset with the Islamophobia is a real issue. I know, because I've been, Baroness Varsi said it back in 2011, I think it was, that Islamophobia has passed the dining table test. Since then, I've been part of the all-party parliamentary group on Islamophobia, and that we developed the definition with academics, with the largest signed up organisations, over 750 organisations signed up to the definition, and the Labour Party has adopted that. Does the Labour Party have work to do? Yes, it does. Do I want to see the Labour Party, if it's in government, to abandon the Tory disengagement policy? Yes, I do. Will I work for that? Yes, I will. Have I worked for it? Yes, I have. These are the things that I want to see in Labour, and I want us to make I would rather rebuild, because leaders come and go. In my time, in the Tories, God, they've had about, I don't even know how many, I've lost count in 9 years how many Prime Minister. I think they've averaged about 6, I think, is it? I've lost count, that's how bad it is, right? So with Canberra, there was Theresa May, and then Boris, and Liz, and Rishi, and, and how many Home Secretaries. The same, parties, the Labour Party is a party. It's not just by one person. It belongs to a people. It belongs to a movement. And for that reason, we've got to continue, because I want the Labour Party to become the natural home of Muslims, as it has been in the past. So yes, we have a hill to climb. Yes, we have to rebuild those relationships, but I'd rather be inside working and making the case for my community than not being there and having somebody as an independent on the back bench who won't be listened to.
Speaking of leadership, one recurring criticism of Keir Starmer specifically is that under his reign in the Labour Party, there has been a shrinking space for criticism of him, criticism of the direction that Labour Party is going in, and those that fit outside of it seem to be getting isolated or pushed out of the party. And we saw that happen with Diane Abbott, we saw that happen with Faiza Shaheen more recently. You yourself are somebody that has been outspoken on a lot of these issues. As you mentioned, in November, you resigned from your front bench position over the issue of the ceasefire. How do you feel about Keir Starmer as a leader? Do you think this is somebody that can create the kind of environment and change that you are fighting for?
So there's two ways of answering that. From a leadership perspective, the burden of leadership for me is to make that change, is to make that case. And I've said before, the art of politics is the art of possible. The art of possibility. It's the art of persuasion. That's what politics really means to me. So that means, and like we've done since November ceasefire, Keir has got to that position of calling for a ceasefire in February. How we got there, we've got there. That's where I need to get to.
How did you get there? Can you tell me about what some of those conversations inside the party?
The Labour Friends of Palestine play a huge role. Part of a parliamentary Labour Party is, it's about getting the issue, keeping it into the centre of a party. And by that, I mean, under Jeremy Corbyn, the crisis around anti-Semitism, etc., the issue of Palestine didn't remain in the centre. It was seen as a side thing. It was seen as a hard left thing, and it's not. It doesn't belong to the hard left. It belongs to everybody. Ideally, it should belong to the Conservatives. Even everybody should be fighting for the issue of Palestine. This should not be a party political issue. The issue of human rights should never be a party political issue. But it became that. and we had to bring it back into the centre so everybody had an ownership of this issue and took an interest in this issue and took a responsibility for this issue. And Labour Friends of Palestine for the last few years has been playing that role and, you know, getting more people to join the Labour Friends of Palestine. That's lobbying with, working with Palestinian medical aid for Palestinians, working with Kabul. Those are the organisations, us working together, getting more MPs to engage, giving them the confidence to speak about the issue, because you can talk about the Palestinian rights of Palestinians. You can talk about them without being anti-Semitic. You can talk about all of these things. But not everybody has that confidence to talk about these things with that conviction, with that nuances, with an understanding the political backdrop, understanding the historical context, all of that. So Labour Friends of Palestine plays a huge role in empowering MPs, in supporting them to visit Palestine, which is how I went. So I went to Labour Friends of so I went to visit Palestine in 2019 with Kabul, with Medical Aid for Palestinians. I went to a military court, watching young people being sentenced. You know, the different way children were treated in comparison to under civil law, under military law. The idea, you know, the idea that a woman in Gaza has to literally advertise her child on Facebook to go for treatment for cancer if they want to get to the West Bank. You know, there are certain roads that settlers can walk on and the Palestinians couldn't. The settler violence, the inequalities of access to water, to drinking water, even in the West Bank. You know, all of these. And I went during Ramadan, and all of these were very, very clear, you know, and that's what we want to do. We want to continue to build. That's what I can't risk not being in that space to be able to build, to get MPs to go and witness it, to go and see it for themselves. Because there's one thing reading about it, there's one thing even seeing it on your screens, but actually being in there and experiencing that from real people, them telling you, being in that military court, watching them parents looking at their children, and they have maybe thrown a rock, or maybe they've spoken to a soldier in a bad way, and in the middle of the night they've been raided, them kids are taken, and their spirit is taken away from them at the age because they don't want that child to grow up, to have a voice, to have, you know, to be able to offer an alternative or to be empowered. You know, these things, when you sit there with parents and you understand that and you experience it, it's a different thing. So one of the things that Labour Friends of Palestine is very instrumental in is getting us into that space, you know. And we have Labour Friends of Israel who are trying, you know, who are very, there's lots said about, and I'm not going to comment on Labour Friends of Israel, but what I can talk about is Labour Friends of Palestine plays a huge role, and I play a huge role in shaping it, in supporting its direction, in working with Kabul, in working with others, in working with Human Rights Watch, working with Amnesty International when we're out there. These are the kind of things that we want to strengthen so we can take people out there to understand what's actually happening.
And as an MP in the Labour Party with a lot of visibility, do you feel like you have the space to challenge Keir Starmer directly on some of the things that he said publicly in the past?
Oh, hell yeah. There is nothing, look, I am not a shrinking wallflower, right? I am not I'm not there to shrink my voice. I am there to amplify the voice of my constituents. There is no question in my head about that. The question is how I deliver on that. Do I deliver it through convening at tables, over a coffee, over a meal? Do I do that with one-to-one meetings with one person and lobbying individuals? Do I do that in the lobbying and that's the judgment call from an emotional intelligence perspective that I have to make. How will I achieve the goal that I want to achieve? That doesn't shrink the power of my voice. It's about how I use that power, how I conduct myself. And those are the things that are really, really important. That's a responsibility placed on me. And there is anybody who knows me in the last 9 years knows I call a spade, you know, and I call it, but I make a judgment call of how I'm going to do it.
There is a big likelihood that in a week's time, that Labour is going to be forming the next government.
Yeah.
And part of that is going to be forming and shaping the foreign policy of the UK and its foreign policy positions immediately on the war that is still ongoing in Gaza. What position should they take a week from now? What should they be saying publicly?
I think they need to be looking at, first of all, they really need to be, I want immediate recognition, right? That's what I want.
Of a state of Palestine?
Yes, of state of Palestine. I want immediate recognition of a state of Palestine, because you cannot negotiate with an occupier and a people that is occupied. You have to have equity. You have to have two equal players at the table, right? You can't. It's like me trying to negotiate my child's bedtime. It's not going to happen. My child's going to say, well, my child isn't going to win. And this is
a power imbalance.
There's a power imbalance, right? And that is a very, very soft example of power imbalance. And here you have a people of millions in the world's largest open-air prison. You have 37,000 already killed, thousands missing, presumed dead. Right? We don't even know what the death scale, the toll is right now. That is the truth. We've got Al Jazeera being stopped. We've had, and I said this in Parliament, what would we do if our ambulances, and this is before October the 7th, what would we be doing if our ambulances were being stopped, if we're taking people? That's the reality on the ground. So the comparator to me is the power imbalance isn't just a power imbalance, it's an extreme power imbalance. It's an illegal occupation of a people and a land. Until you give those people and that they have that recognition and come to the table, you cannot not have that. And I said this about the Abraham Accords as well. At that time, I said, how can you have an idea of the Abraham Accords without the Palestinians at the table? I can't understand. No, it doesn't make sense to me. And I've had that conversation in the UAE with the foreign minister, and I've spoken about this, right? So that's my responsibility, is making sure that I get that on the table. Now, for me, recognition is one, but there's also the issue of arms. The arms, we need to see that legal advice immediately. Because if the ICC is issuing arrest warrants, it's only going to, if we, as a signatory to that, the Rome Statute, we need to see that legal advice, and we need to be stopping arms sales. That's what we need to be doing. We can't be continuing to supply Israel with arms if there are human rights violations. Well, we know there are human rights violations. We know there are war crimes being committed. There's no, yes, it's not for me to make a judgment as a politician, but it's pretty common, it's pretty clear, isn't it, what's happening? It's pretty clear. You've got to call a spade a spade. So what do we do? Where do we go with that? So I want to see immediately, because that is not an issue that is just confined to the Middle East. It affects global politics. It affects people here. It affects everybody. So the idea that it's happening so far away and it doesn't matter to us it's not true. It is absolutely not true. So we need to bring it back. And that's what Keir needs to do when he's in government. Whoever the next foreign secretary needs to be looking at that legal advice. That's the second thing. Or actually, maybe in the first thing, to stop the ceasefire. Whichever way. But they are of equal importance to me. And then it's about, what about the next day?
Yeah.
What does the next day look like for Gaza? What does the next day look like for humanitarian aid? I've spoken about it again. I spoke about it when you've got twins that are 8 months old. They should be weighing 8 kgs. They weigh less than a newborn baby because of malnutrition. The famine there is very, very real. So these are the kind of things that I really, really want us to be looking at immediately in government. Absolutely.
So those actionable steps, immediate recognition of a state of Palestine and immediate arms embargo on Israel, on arms sales from the UK to Israel. Now, those two positions are not currently the official positions of the Labour Party.
No, they're not. And that's what I will be lobbying for. I will be going back, and I will be saying those positions.
And I'm sure that you're speaking to a lot of voters that are asking you, that are upset. You said that a lot of them feel betrayed by the party, the position that is taken, and they want those two steps to happen as well. How are you convincing them if they're coming to you and saying, well, we're not going to vote for Labour anymore because they're not doing what we want to see happen? What position we want this party that is going to form a government to take? If they are not taking this position now, how do we know that they're going to take this position in the future, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, maybe ever?
So there is no guarantees, but there is much more of a higher chance with me advocating for it than somebody on the opposition backbenches. That's the ultimate litmus test. The ultimate litmus test is, can you ignore your own backbenchers, which would include me, and the Labour Friends of Palestine, when we have a coalition of MPs making that case, making a case for this is what we want to see, to an independent sat with the Tories on those benches? And that is the question we have to ask ourselves. And for my constituents, that's the argument I make. My constituents are not stupid. They may be as angry and angrier. They may be pained. They may be, all of those feelings, really, really emotional feelings, and rightfully so, because I share those emotional feelings. But they are not stupid. And they understand what it takes to be able to have that strong voice. And the one thing that nobody has said to me is that you haven't done the right thing. Nobody has said to me on the doorstep that you have not called for us. There was misunderstanding, because one of my opponents went in a mosque and said, oh, she didn't call for a ceasefire. And then he said, oh, well, she didn't sign the EDM. Well, at the time, I was a shadow minister. I didn't sign the EDM. What does, politically speaking, do I want to sign an EDM? Is that the hill I want to die on, so to speak, and give up my position on the front bench? Or would I rather do it for a vote, which actually means something? And I chose to wait for the vote the next week because I knew it was coming. So I didn't sign the EDM. But does that make my voice any less powerful? No, it doesn't. If anything, it made it more powerful. So there are mechanisms that we can use as influence. And if there's a group of us together asking for our leadership to meet with us, for us to lobby and to put our case forward, there's a higher chance of things happening, isn't there? And that's what I say to my constituents. So yesterday it was really interesting. I got one guy who said, I love you, Naz, but I can't. And his father was like, I'm voting for you. And the son was like, I'm not, because it's just Labour, it's Labour. And I said, look, you need a strong voice. Send me back as a strong voice. The bigger the mandate you give me, the stronger voice I become, right? And he said, well, 99% there. And I said, look, I'll come back for the 1%, So and I'm having those conversations when people get the chance to understand that, and when I get the chance to ask them and talk to them, that's where they come at. Well, that's what the result is.
You are somebody that has campaigned a lot about the issue of Islamophobia in this country. Yep. And you've been somebody that has criticized this government and the Conservatives a lot for not dealing with the issue of Islamophobia. How do you feel about the issue of Islamophobia within your own party, within the ranks of Labour, maybe Labour senior leadership? We spoke on this podcast to Ali Milani, a former Labour candidate, and he said very explicitly that there is a real issue of Islamophobia within Labour senior leadership in particular. How do you feel about that issue? Do you feel like it exists, and how do you deal with it?
Well, let's just look at what we're dealing with the Conservative Party, what we've had, right? There is no comparator between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, wherever Islamophobia. Islamophobia exists everywhere. We know that. We've done research. We know that in every institution, be it government or non-government, because of the narratives post 9/11, even long before that, the narrative around Muslims has been that has seeped through society, and it's been normalised. We know from Baroness Varsi's dining table speech. We know from her since speech that Muslims don't matter. The speech she did to mark the 10th anniversary of that. We know from the Islamophobia definition we have an issue with Islamophobia in society, and Labour Party is part of that society. There is no question about that. What do we do? What I want to do is see we said we'd adopt a definition. I want that definition absolutely looked at in institutions in our Labour Party and unpick that. And as part of our re-engagement with the Muslim community and building back that trust, that has to play a part. That absolutely has to play a part. There has been, and I'm pleased to say, look, when Sadiq Khan, when Lee Anderson, or otherwise known as 30p Lee, made the comments about Sadiq Khan, not one single Tory went out and said that was Islamophobic. All they said was, oh, it was wrong. Well, you suspended him. Well, he did something wrong. Well, a lot of people do a lot of wrong things, but you don't suspend them. So why have you suspended him? Was it Islamophobic? Well, what he said was wrong. We wouldn't use those words. What he said was wrong. That's not good enough. That's the difference, right? And and my party has also made mistakes. We've got. I feel really, really strongly about Trevor Phillips, for example. That was a classic case as far as I'm concerned. If you replace the word Muslim with Jew in terms of what he was saying, there would be that was an issue for us. I've challenged that. I will continue to challenge that. So there are things where my party hasn't got it right, and there are things that I want them to do better on. And Muslim engagement and dealing with Muslims, we've had comments made where the difference has been, when you talk about the Sadiq issue, when there has been comments made and attributed to a Labour source, Labour have officially, immediately come out and condemned them. And that was the right thing to do in comparison to Lee Anderson. So here you have a source being reported on saying, talking about Muslims in a certain way. You go to the party leadership, these are not our views, we condemn them, they're Islamophobic. Here you have a sitting MP who makes those comments about Sadiq Khan, and they say, no, they're wrong. Do you know, there is a difference. There is a difference. That difference needs to be much wider. We still need to do much better. But yeah, and that's a role that I will continue to play, because, I'm going to hold the government to account. I'm equally going to, and my expectations of my own party are even higher, aren't they? My expectations of a Tory party are much lower in terms of, the things with what we've seen with Suella Braverman's comments, with, the hate marches, the invasion language, the kind of language that she's used, the kind of language that Priti Patel, Suella Braverman made Priti Patel look better. And that's saying something, And in comparison, you've got a different party which has implemented some of the recommendations from the Labour Muslim Network report. So are we there yet? Clearly not. Do we need to do work? Yes, we do. But boy, we can't compare the two parties. Yeah.
So when you speak about the fact that you feel like your party needs to regain the trust of Muslim voters, how does it go about doing that?
Well, engagement, because there's anger, there's real anger, and it's got to be able to demonstrate. One of them for me, I would like to see from the Palestinian issue again, I'd love to see immediate recognition. That would go a great way in restoring confidence. It was like we're listening because that's what people want.
Do you think that would happen?
Yeah, we live in hope, don't we? And that's something I'm not going to stop lobbying on. It's one of my pledges. So obviously I want it to happen, and I'm going to continue to lobby for it through Labour Friends of Palestine as an individual MP. I'm going to continue to do that. But there's also, if we get the legal advice, we put an arms sales on Israel, an embargo, that will be a step in the right direction. There are, leadership has challenges, and it's a responsibility, and our actions speak volumes. And I think that's what I'll be looking to the leadership to speak with their actions. Leadership is something that you have mentioned a lot. It's clearly something that you think about quite a lot. Oh God, yeah. Leadership is one of my life's passions. Because when you have the right leadership, you can change the world. What kind of leader do you hope that Keir Starmer would be for this country? Well, I'm hoping, first and foremost, I know he'll be different than Rishi Sunak, right? Because you've not got the chaos, you've not got the, he will definitely be, what he will definitely not be, let's put it that way, what he definitely won't be is more of Rishi, right? So that's a good thing. That's a starting point. In terms of what I'd like him to be, I'd like him to be engaged. I'd like him to engage more with the Muslim community. I'd like him to engage with things that matter to people. I would like to see. Didn't see the leaders' debate last night. I've still yet to watch it. I would like to see. There's lots of. I think from a standards perspective in politics, what I really worry about is Nigel Farage winning and having UKIP on the opposite benches. That is a real worry for me, especially as a Muslim. As a Muslim whose daughter is a visible Muslim, with 2 children, 2 boys who are Muslim, these are the things. And for my constituents and the wider Muslim community, that kind of racist narrative, that kind of scapegoating, that kind of division politics in Parliament, in that space, will be horrific for us, absolutely horrific for us. And that also is talking about the standards and decency of politicians. Politicians, when I went into politics, I was thinking, oh my God, there's going to be so many big leaders there, and there's a nobility in politics. And what politics is, what I see now, for example, even in the streets of Bradford West whilst campaigning, I now have to have a personal security office, personal close protection officer with me. And that was because of the viral incident that went viral about the guy who held the phone and was trying to intimidate me. and harass me.
This is why you were out canvassing.
Yeah, so I was out campaigning, which is a normal thing for every parliamentary candidate to do, which was door knocking, and then I had somebody really, really angry in my face for 4.5 minutes until I pulled my camera on. And the irony was, he said,
they were attacking you. They were calling you a Zionist,
and yeah, so he was very, very gesturally aggressive, very trying to. And at the time, yes, of course, it feels intimidating. Of course, it feels threatening. Of course, it feels hatred. It's really, really horrible. But I'm not one to be intimidated from doing the job that I'm doing. That's not on my radar. That's not my bandwidth. That's not my modus operandi. My modus operandi is I have, God has blessed me with a position. I need the courage and conviction to carry on, and the people that vote for me give me that courage and conviction. I get it from my faith. I get it from lots of sources. So I will continue to do what I do. But the comparison I'm making is I'm used to the far right attacking me. I'm used to, somebody going to prison for threatening to kill me and my family. And that's different. What I see here and what worries me is where that political debate has got to in terms of me being out in my constituency and that anger spewing out like that towards me from a fellow Muslim brother. And the other thing is that not one of the independent candidates has condemned that, has said what happened was wrong. Despite there being a police investigation, not one candidate, not one of the independents has come out and said that what happened was wrong. This was a woman who was being harassed by a man who was, that was wrong. Everybody can see that. That worries me, is where that vitriol, the likes of Nigel Farage coming into Parliament potentially, and I hope it doesn't happen. But that scares me. That scares me for our future of unity. That scares me for what potentially could happen in terms of division and community cohesion, and it scares me of what I've experienced.
Do you feel like that division, can you see it in your community here?
Yeah, of course you can. That video was one of those examples. And yes, there have been, I was out at an event and the guy literally said to the chap, it was not an event, it was a shopping thing before Eid, pre-Eid gathering kind of thing. And the guy, you literally saw him at the corner of your eyes and saying, get your camera out, watch this. And it was performance for the camera, because you've got your TikTok slogans, you want your 2 minutes of fame, or you want your 2 minutes of notoriety because you've harassed a Labour MP, or you've, and this was a man who was over 6 foot tall and very, very gesturally intimidating, and it was just for the purpose of a camera. It wasn't because he wanted to reason with me or ask me. It was like, I said, brother, I'll show you I voted for the ceasefire. But no, you didn't. And it wasn't. It was talking over me. It was like, and because it was on private premises, the guy who owned the premises was very, very clear that you are not allowed to release that video because that's illegal. That's illegal. But that does happen. That does happen.
How did you feel after that first initial video went out and then it went viral and people were sharing it?
So at the time, I just wanted to I was more concerned about the young student because that was the first door he'd knocked on. So I was firstly concerned about him. And when you've got other responsibilities around you, as in other door knockers with you, you're very, very worried that, your sixth sense kicks in about, are they going to be okay? And then it was like, okay, this guy isn't stopping, so how do I stop it? How can I stop this and de-escalate it in a safe manner? So it was like, okay, I'm going to get my phone out and I'm going to video you so I know who you are. And at that point, the irony was, oh, I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to intimidate me. And all I did was silently take my phone out and record. That's all I did. And at that point, it stopped because he lasted a whole 22 seconds. And again, that just tells you, it tells me the strength of his character. And the next day I didn't campaign because I didn't feel safe. It wasn't even just about me being safe. I'm a mother of 3 children. I've got 3 kids, and my mum has not been well with it since, because she's looking after my kids whilst I'm out. Because I'm out first thing in the morning, I'm not back till late at night. So my mum's kind of moved in with me during the election period. My kids see it, that affects me. That affects me more. Less so, and I've got to take responsibility and I've got to take precautionary measures now, not because I'm afraid, not because of I'm afraid of what will happen to me. There's a wider issue for me. I have to think about my children. I have to think about my family. I also have to think about, do I take measures to where this shouldn't happen in the first instance, because that divides, that makes people even more angrier. Because the amount of phone calls, the amount of support that I've had nationally, internationally, the amount of the rest of my constituents or people that I know in the community who are appalled by that incident, and that gives you hope, and that gives you, but that doesn't stop you from taking responsibility of trying to take precautions. And that's not how I should have to do it. So I can't take my son out with me campaigning like I normally would take my kids out with me. That I can't do anymore. So I'm restricted now. So that disheartens me, and it saddens me. And it saddens me even more because when you find out that that person that is associated with the place where the Independent is associated with, which is a particular church in Bradford, where that rhetoric is coming from, and there's that vitriol and that hatred. We've had one of the chief, if you like, supporters, the biggest supporters of Muhammad Ali Islam, is a man who has been reported to the police by myself, and then there's links to them, the same camp of people, and that worries me because it's like it's not about Palestine, it's football hooliganism, it's that kind of rhetoric, it's about vitriol, it's about anger, it's about hatred, it's not about, because this isn't the way, because as Muslims this isn't the way we behave. Even when we're angry, there is still an etiquette of behaviour. There is still a way we conduct ourselves. So that pains me from a Muslim perspective. I'm used to taking it from the Tommy Robinsons of the world, spewing that kind of stuff. But the idea that you have on your WhatsApp statuses a picture of me and a Palestinian and calling us, the actual Palestinian ambassador, that you're Zionist sellouts, you're Zionist sympathizers, that's kind of like, wow, you are not more Palestinian than the Palestinian people. You do not have a monopoly on anger and pain. Nobody does. If we are being true to the Palestinian people, then you cannot have anything about them without them. And what is it that the Palestinians need, in addition to du'as, in addition to that humanitarian aid? They need a political solution to give them their rights to self-determination, to give them their dignity back, to have a state. How do we get there? What is the best way to get there? Is it on the backbenches and screaming and shouting? No, it isn't. Is it through diplomacy? Is it through working with people and getting them to your point of view? That is where the conversation needs to be at. There's a place for protest. It's absolutely crucial that people continue to protest, like they are doing across the American university camps, like they are doing everywhere. But it is equally important for people to be in that space for a diplomatic solution for the people of Palestine.
And that anger is real, and it's visceral, and you can feel it, and
Yep.
it has spilled into not just the Muslim community, a lot of other communities
Yeah.
here in the country. How do you heal that anger? How do you begin to bridge those divides of people that may not be ready to listen to you and to kind of have maybe like a logical debate about your political stances in the past? They're just reacting out of anger.
So one of the things is, the reason why we're doing a sit-down interview is that people can listen to it. Mm-hmm. People can look at and listen to an alternative view in the confines of whether they want to do it on their mobile phone, whether they want to do it on TV, wherever they're doing it, away from the echo chamber. Because the echo chambers in that space, they feed that narrative, don't they? And people have a responsibility to themselves to learn, to go and educate themselves. And if they're really true to the cause, then that is our responsibility, just like it's been my responsibility. I didn't know as much about the history of the Palestinian political struggle, politically and diplomatically, the diplomatic avenues that have been used. I've had to go away and learn about these things. I've had to talk to people about these things. I've had to go on because I was an activist. I remember being in the double-page spread in the Daily Mail in 2014. Well, in 2016 they covered it. Me and my children lying on the floor in McDonald's. That was my protest because I was angry. So what did I do with it? is the question. We all can be angry, but how do you channel that anger? There's a space for activism, absolutely there is. There's a space for diplomacy, absolutely there is. And we have to have both of them. We have to have them because we have to have different areas in how we tackle it. It has to be a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach, because obviously the diplomacy hasn't worked. The Oslo Accords weren't delivered. The Balfour Declaration still hasn't been delivered. All these initiatives, when Netanyahu had opportunities to get round the table, he didn't get round the table. If anything, he scuppered them. He is not a partner for peace. We know that. So what is the West? What is the Western, those sensible governments? It is painful when you see a different application for the friends of the West and applied to when it comes to the Palestinian people. That level of hypocrisy is laid bare. That angers me. That angers my constituents. That angers the world, and rightfully so, because there is, Palestinian lives matter, children's lives matter, regardless of where you are. These are the things that we need to be able to articulate in a way, using social media, using the platforms, using the access what is available to us. 2014, that access was for me on the floor of McDonald's. To 2024, the access for me is on the green benches, is in those circles of diplomats, sitting with them, talking to them. What do I need to, how can we frame this? Where are the talking points that are going to get us from here to move this narrative along, to move a conversation along? Because this isn't something that's going to be solved in 1 month, or by Naz Shah being elected or not elected. That's not going to resolve the issue. But what will happen is Naz Shah will remain a strong voice inside government. That's ultimately the reason, that's ultimately my pitch to my constituents. Going back to your question, what is it that I'm saying to constituents? That's what I'm saying to constituents.
And finally, we have had the last 8-9 months of continuous protests on the street against this Conservative government. If next week you are voted into your seat again, that Keir Starmer is voted into the office of Prime Minister, we have a Labour Party, and you guys might be seeing those protests on the street calling out your names instead of Rishi Sunak's. What is your advice? What do you say to people who are angry, who want to hold you and your government to account, your future government to account? How do they go about doing that? What do they keep saying? How do they make sure that the promises that you have, you're going to stand by?
We have to be held to account. The press freedoms, the protests, all of those are legitimate parts of a democracy. That's one of the things that we pride ourselves on, is the right to protest. If people want to hold us to account through protest and carry on, I cannot imagine those protests stopping for the marches that are happening in London for Palestinians. In Bradford we have a march planned, where we have a protest planned, and on last weekend there was a protest. Protest is absolutely a legitimate part of our democracy, a function of our democracy. What I would say to people is carry on with the engagement. Carry on with the engagement. Lobby your MPs, be it whichever colour that is. Whether you've got a Lib Dem, whether you've got a Green, whether you've got a Labour MP, whether you've got a Tory MP, lobby them, because that makes a difference. Because the more you lobby them, the more it's raised. The more it's raised, the more pressure it builds. I will continue to advocate. That's what I say to my constituents on local issues. That's what I can say to people globally, nationally, wherever I go. Now, I will absolutely, the right to protest is one of our rights, and it's part of a healthy democracy. And press freedoms are equally important to hold us to account. Why shouldn't we be held to account? We don't get into politics. When we sign up to politics, it's because we should be held to account. Because if you're held to account, you know whether your politician is doing the right job, because that's what we're there for.
Naz Shah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your time today.
No, thank you. Thank you for letting me get lots off my chest and be able to communicate to people. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for you being here and coming all the way to Bradford, because I think there's an important conversation. Now, I can't get to 79,000 doors, in 5 weeks. It's an impossible task, right? And that's 40 plus thousand to meet 79,000 voters. That's not going to happen. So if this interview can get through to some of my voters, and if it can it was able to put a nuanced conversation across, and being grilled by you is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's part of, why I like it. Yeah, I hope so, because it's part of that accountability, isn't it? What is it that you're getting if you vote for Naz Shah? on the 4th of July. And I'm hoping that this interview will go somewhere in reassuring people that actually we still need that strong voice in Parliament, not a weak one on the backbenches. So I'm grateful for your time.
And I hope you'll be back.
Inshallah.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Big Picture, and a big thank you to our guest today, Naz Shah. We want to hear what you have to say about this conversation and the upcoming general election, so please leave your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, you can listen to this episode and all of our episodes in audio format wherever you get your podcasts from. And until next time, salam.